You're listening to Why We Do What We Do.
Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I'm your host, Abraham.
And I'm your host, Shane. Oh, dude, that's so much fun.
The muse struck me in the moment. We're a psychology podcast. Sometimes we're a fighting podcast, as it were today. We talk about all the things that people do and why they do them and all that sort of fun stuff. And that's us.
Yeah, and today we're talking about professional wrestling. So as a child of the 90s, I grew up with the wrestling boom that was, the carryover from the 80s and all the big stars and all that. And then into the 90s with the clash between WCW and WWF and all that fun stuff. And so we're going to talk about all that stuff a little bit. But we're talking about kind of why people even like this thing when they know it's staged.
Yeah. What is it? Why is it? Why is it again? I guess.
We're going to do what is it? When was it? Why is it? And why do they?
Great. If you're listening to this on the day that it publishes, I mean, first of all, good on you for staying so up to date on your podcast feed. That is impressive. Congratulations on that. If that's the case, then let us join together in celebrating that it is National Queso Day.
Yes, and for our vegan friends, hopefully your queso is vegan. It's National Care for Kids Day, which is a good general rule.
I think we can all agree on that. National Crime and Intelligence Analyst Appreciation Day. So for all those Black Ops people out there, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you to my FBI agent. It's also National Fried Rice Day. Good day, like that.
National Punch Day, so get your fist ready. Oh, wait, this is the other kind of punch.
I was going to say, it's very apt for this episode.
It is.
Also apt for this episode, National Gibberish Day, because a lot of times when you see these guys talk, not intelligible at all.
Yeah, it's just like this.
They all sound like Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah. This is Adopt a Less Adoptable Pet Week. And by that, we do not mean go into a zoo and take an animal.
No.
We mean go into an animal shelter where there are animals that are having trouble being adopted and give them a home.
Like older adoptable pets and animals with disabilities and stuff like that. Please go adopt them.
Yeah. They need homes. They need love.
They need homes. They need love. I have a friend who adopted a Chihuahua that was missing an eye and named it the Professor. It was great.
Cute.
So there was the Professor and Batman and Mr. Batman. They live together.
Nice.
That person's a BCBA now. It's also National Astronomy Week.
Hey, I love that.
International
Clean Hands Week. I'm going to go ahead and make that International Clean Hands Decade. Let's go ahead and keep those hands clean.
Yeah, especially with everything going on. Yes.
But at least for now, the official holiday is week. Let's all work together to make it century.
Yeah, wash your hands. It's also National Farm and Ranch Safety and Health Week. So big fan of that for people who are working on farms and ranches to stay safe.
Yeah, and thank you all for keeping us alive.
Yeah.
We would like to keep you alive.
Yes.
Speaking of which, is National Go-Kart Week. So
hell yeah.
Go out there and do the go-kart thing.
Oh, I love go-karts. So much fun.
That they really are. Mini NASCAR for children.
Or grown-ups.
It's true. We love it.
Yeah, big go-kart advocates over here at Why We Do What We Do.
But as we said, we're talking about fiction and play acting today. And that is to say, we're going to find out what Billy Corgan, murder, samurai swords, and panda bears all have in common.
It's a wild ride. I mean, I think most people know professional wrestling is in itself a ridiculous thing, but it gets a little bit wilder. So let's talk about what we are talking about. We are not talking about wrestling in terms of like Greco-Roman wrestling or grappling or anything like that. We are talking about professional wrestling. And professional wrestling is a type of entertainment involving wrestling matches whose progress and outcome are planned in advance, typically between performers and established character roles. So it's usually a staged thing. The match itself might have some improvisation in it. They might have some things that go on in it, but in itself, the outcome is usually predetermined.
And that is the definition of professional wrestling.
Yeah.
It's a stage play where the theme of the play, of every play, is gratuitous violence.
Yes.
But for fun. While the history of wrestling and grappling sports is very rich, its earliest recorded moment was found in ancient Mesopotamia, dating back to around 3000 BCE. But we're not actually talking about that. As we said, we're talking more of the show, the wrestling entertainment world.
Yes, and professional wrestling found its start in the early 1800s in Western Europe and the United Kingdom as a form of entertainment and showmanship. So it was basically set up as a way to entertain folks in their communities.
Now, some of you may, even if you're not very familiar with the world of professional wrestling, may have heard that there are all these fun names for professional wrestlers,
Yes.
like The Undertaker and such and things of that nature.
The Ultimate Warrior.
Exactly. Now, this is a long-standing tradition because some early wrestlers performed under such names as Herculean Flower, Edward the Steel Eater, Gustave Davignon, the Bone Wrecker, etc. Did I get that right? Davignon?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay. And in some instances, they would challenge members of the public to see if they could knock them down for money. Which also, there's probably we should do something on like carnies sometimes and like the carnival freak show things.
We're about to. Yeah, we're gonna do some carny dives real quick. So sometime in 1848, professional wrestling saw its debut in the circus. Jean Exploitation established what they called flat hand wrestling as part of the circus troupe in what would be described as a performance art. So this flat hand wrestling, what we know today as wrestling, kind of like some of the evolution of it, started as this idea of flat hand wrestling, not the Greco-Roman wrestling, as a performance art within the circus.
Okay, so why is this different? Well, because during some of these acts, professional wrestlers, professional in this case meaning it's their job, would work with other members of the troupe to identify quote-unquote dumb oafs and patrons who were easily duped into other carnival games, which obviously is a hallmark of that sort of industry. They would challenge patrons of the carnival to try to pin the wrestler, only for the wrestler to quickly pin that person and take their money. So got some hoodwinking going on.
Yes. Now, within the wrestling community, there is a term called mark. We're going to basically unpack this. The term mark originated from the carnival. Troupe members would mark or like use chalk to identify easy victims. They would mark on their back or their shoulder so that other members of the carnival could pinpoint them and trick them into getting into these carnival games, the midway games, and get money from them. So they would essentially be marked for victimization.
Wow, that sounds like one of those apocryphal stories of like how a term came to be.
Yeah.
Describing a person as a mark. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly where it came from.
Wow. The term is now also used in the wrestling community to describe someone who believes that the sport is real. More about that later as we'll get into it.
Yeah, we'll talk about what's real and what's not and all that fun stuff. So in the early 1900s, professional wrestling began to gain in popularity, with some events selling nearly 30,000 tickets, like the 1911 Frank Gotch George Hackenschmidt rematch at Kaminsky Park. So even in 1911, they were selling 30,000 tickets to these events. It's a lot of people.
Yeah, they're like, we can make money on this, you guys. Let's make some money.
Let's make a lot of money. I mean, just to put this in perspective, last night WWE had an event called Payback, and it had 14,000 people at it. So,
Whoa.
if that tells you anything about like how this is still a fairly popular thing, but it's never really waned.
Yeah. All right. While there were countless events and wrestlers in the US and Europe at this time, it wasn't until the 1940s that the National Wrestling Alliance, or NWA, you may have heard the initials, was born. This organization was originally established as a committee to help regulate wrestling and provide a quote-unquote legitimacy to the sport.
Yep. Fun fact, NWA is currently owned by Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins. So there's our first tie-in.
Our first tie-in. Wow. I did not know that. That's wild.
Yeah. NWA is actually a professional wrestling organization similar to WWE, AEW. It's got its own titles. It's got its own wrestlers. It's got its own show and stuff like that. But it's a smaller kind of operation right now.
Okay, got you.
Yeah.
All right. Through this early period, there were quite a few gimmick matches similar to what you would see today. One example of this is Terrible Ted, the wrestling bear. He was an American black bear who wrestled in North America between 1950s into the 1970s. I think, when I said the American black bear, what you heard is a person dressed as a black bear or like someone who used the wrestling name Black Bear. This was a actual bear, like the animal, the four-legged quadruped, climbs up trees and eats bear, like digs in people's trash. Bear. Yeah,
that's him. Another important point: he wrestled longer than so many professional wrestlers actually wrestle. So
that's true. 20 years. Yeah, that's
20 years. He was a 20-year wrestling bear. So
man,
Oh man, I'm telling you, it's a wild time. It's a wild time.
We haven't even been doing this podcast for 20 years yet.
I know this bear has a longer wrestling career than we do. Also, what a great name, Terrible Ted the Wrestling Bear.
Indeed.
I mean, it aligns so well with professional wrestling. It's so good. So around the same time, professional wrestling began to develop in Japan and Mexico, both developing their own unique styles of the sport. You may actually be familiar with the flying style, like it's like high risk, like jumping off ropes and backflips and all that stuff, and decorative masks that you find of the members of the wrestling community in South America and Mexico, luchadors.
Yeah.
And so that's where that started. And so Rey Mysterio and those folks kind of helped bring that to the United States a little bit more too. There's a lot of people who are luchadors. And this started coming up around the same time that Ted the Terrible Wrestling Bear was around.
Fun. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There's something to be said about, the animal exploitation and that sort of thing in there. And we've covered that in other topics, and we'll cover that some more in the future. But for now, understanding this is just part of the history. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, the AWA and WWF are both created, which begins the sort of more aggressive competition and more around territories, like regional competition.
And now territories were established by the NWA and basically governed who owned or promoted different organizations. So, for instance, you had NWA in Montana, Hollywood, and Iowa, but you also had AWA in Boston, Maple Leaf Wrestling in Toronto, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation in DC and New York, New Japan Pro Wrestling in Tokyo, and World Championship Wrestling in Atlanta, among many, many others. There were a lot of wrestling promotions at this time.
Now, again, if you can make money on it, it's a thing.
And they were.
Yep. Oftentimes, these territories would develop their own championship titles, steal wrestlers from other territories for their own, and generally, you'd see a lot of headbutting with other groups to tout that they were the best of the best, etc. So, not terribly different from like sports teams buying up the best players from competing sports teams. You get like the Yankees, for example, doing that sort of thing.
Right.
So, yeah, very much like other sports, my team is the best, and I have a favorite player. And that's, again, very just similar to what was going on here. And it makes a lot of sense. And when you follow the money, like you start seeing relatively similar patterns emerge.
Right. I mean, when you kind of dive into the wrestling world, you have people have a favorite kind of organization or company. They have their favorite wrestlers. Like it's no different than other sports. Like it's really like it aligns really, really well. Now, when the World Wrestling Federation, today's WWE as we know it, split from NWA in 1982, after Vince McMahon's takeover of the organization, this began to propel wrestling into a different kind of entertainment stratosphere. What we started seeing at that time was more TV appearances, more marketing, the development of more over-the-top characters, Saturday morning cartoons, more merchandising, and the 80s were really kind of absurd for wrestling. I mean, the amount of attention wrestling was getting was pretty incredible for something that was really, when you watch it, it's so very ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. When the 90s came around, we're starting to get into slightly more modern times. The WCW started to begin to gain traction, and the Monday Night Wars started. And this was essentially a back and forth for viewership for the two Monday night television shows for WWF and WCW. If any of you remember when Hulk Hogan went bad and we had Nitro versus Raw, but if not, that was the whole thing.
Uh-huh.
But you start to hear those names, I think more people of our time are a little bit more familiar.
Yeah, you might be familiar with like the NWO versus D-Generation X and all those factions that come up and all that. So it's a really fun time to watch, but it's also really problematic. Popularity was tanking in the mid-90s before like all of that rivalry started, and wrestling began to get quite a bit edgier. And what you find is what people will describe as what's called the Attitude Era in the WWF, where many of the segments on the show would show off more risque content in lieu of matches. And I'm going to tell you right now, it did not age well. As one example, one wrestler's character, his name is Val Venus. He was a porn star who ended up leaving porn to work in wrestling. He ended up losing a bet to a Yakuza-esque type of group that was in WWF and had his penis cut off with a samurai sword. In a segment that happened on TV. They held his arms and they put his penis on a chopping block and they cut it off with a samurai sword. That's tie-in too, by the way, samurai sword. But that's a fairly mild example of what happened in this time period. It did not age well.
All right.
Also, What a ridiculous premise.
Yeah. I can understand why some people maybe were like, this isn't really for me.
Yeah. And also, he wasn't like championship. Like, he wasn't one of the championship guys. So he was like one of like the lower card guys.
If you're going to cut off a penis, go big or go home,
That's what I'm saying,
In the 2000s, WWF changed its name to WWE due to a conflict with the World Wildlife Fund.
Yep. So for those of you who don't know, the World Wildlife Fund, its logo is a panda bear.
Oh, aha. Tie-in number 3.
Ah, yes.
All right, so the WWF changed its name. It also bought WCW, and things have been continuing ever since. We also saw the development of Total Non-Stop Action Wrestling, or TNA, later changed to Impact Wrestling, Lucha Underground, which was awesome, according to Shane, and All Elite Wrestling, or AEW. And not to say that I disagree, I just am not familiar with it.
Yeah. Lucha Underground basically started because, like, the storyline, and this is something that happens in wrestling, these really ridiculous storylines, but basically something supernatural happens. They break into an Aztec temple, and there's a wrestling group there, and that's what the entire show is based on. It's fun when you get into how ridiculous it is. But the question that comes up often is, why do people watch it, and why do these wrestlers do it? And I really want to unpack that. But first, some ads.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the wrestling, and we have talked, I think, a little bit about why the wrestling, mostly in the terms of the financial part of it, but now though really, but why wrestling?
Yes. So one of the major criticisms of wrestling is that wrestling is fake, since the outcome is always planned. But there's a huge amount of athleticism that goes into being able to keep up with a match. I mean, when you watch these guys perform, they are incredible athletes. Even if what they're doing is staged, they have to be in really good shape to make this happen.
Yeah, they train like crazy. Regular workouts include extreme amount of cardio, high intensity interval or HIIT training, strength training, among other things. Beginners classes may include a 12-week program that teaches you how to fall, bounce off ropes, communicate with your wrestling partner, call matches, etc. Of course, this isn't the end of your training. An ongoing practice to develop your character, speak on a microphone, that is like cut promos, produce matches, are also all part of the process. It's a huge training thing. This is probably not the best analogy to make, but when Walking Dead was on, they had like actors who were going to be extras as zombies had to go through like a zombie boot camp to train how to be zombies. That sounds like there's kind of a similar thing. Like, it's a very specific set of skills that's needed to pull this off, that they sort of had. They had like pro wrestling camp, basically. Really?
I mean, and honestly, I have a friend who is he's a wrestler. He does it on the side. And the amount of training he had to go through like 3 straight months of training as a wrestler before he could ever be in the ring with somebody. And that was to perform at like house shows where you had to, first of all, confirm that you were trained, but also you didn't get paid anything. And we'll talk more about that later. Yeah. The ridiculous pay for this.
Yeah.
So many wrestlers, while incredibly athletic, face life-threatening injuries as a result of performing these planned matches. Stone Cold Steve Austin famously broke his neck during a match with Owen Hart when a pile driver, which is a move that basically like drops you on your head onto a mat. The pile driver went wrong and Owen Hart broke Stone Cold Steve Austin's neck. He was paralyzed for a period of time.
Oh.
And Stone Cold Steve Austin being probably the most famous wrestler besides Hulk Hogan, right?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe, John Cena's getting up there.
John Cena's up there too, yeah. 100 for The Rock.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, broken necks and limb. I mean, this is, when you're doing stunt work, there is an inherent danger. That's why they oftentimes hire stunt actors to do those things for movies.
Yes.
Because those are people who are trained to do that. But nevertheless, and because of that danger, you have broken necks and limbs, ligament and muscle tears, concussions. These are all very common in the wrestling community, even with these planned performances. But why? Well, as we said, professional wrestlers are basically trained to be stunt people, but at a much more extreme level. I mean, for one thing, where some person may only film a few movies a year, some wrestlers will work every night for months or even sometimes years on end. They're doing live performances where they don't have the luxury of special effects, where you can obscure part of what happened during a violent stunt so that someone can land on a crash pad, where they have a wire that pulls them out of the way of something,
right?
Where there's green screen and CGI. So they're stunts that are more sometimes athletic than they are inherently dangerous. There are obviously plenty of very dangerous stunts that they pull off in movies.
Right.
But these wrestlers, like, everything they're doing has to be live and on the spot. Stunts that they're doing with very little in the way of additional infrastructure. It basically just comes down to planning.
Right.
So there's a lot of injuries have happened.
And the wrestling rings that they fall on are a very small layer of foam and plywood. That's really all they're falling on. over and over and over again for 15, 30, 40 minutes at a time. So it's not like one stunt and you're done and you can move on from it. It is consistently a workout every night, falling. And they learn how to fall. You learn how to fall in classes, but it's really hard on your body. People don't realize how hard it is on your body. It's a painful sport.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you'd think that would mean you are compensated sufficiently to make it all worth it. And we'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah, and you are not. Now, some reports do indicate that professional wrestlers have less of a chance to become a contracted WWE wrestler than you would of becoming an Olympian. So let me say this a different way. You are more likely to be an Olympian than you are to be a professional wrestler in WWE.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
That is wild. That is surprising. See it as like that this is a thing you do because you can't do other real sports, and it's actually not the case. It's really
it's the opposite. It's actually the opposite. You're more likely to do a real sport and get famous and like win money than you would to be a professional wrestler.
All right. So you're listening to this. We're hearing about their injuries. We're hearing about how much work it is. We're hearing about how difficult it is to break into this. Why do people even do this? Sounds like it hurts a lot. Well, there are a few reasons. One of the first ones I think that jumps out to most people is fame. Even though it's unlikely, there are a few wrestlers who have gotten very famous from their professional wrestling career. One of the ones we just mentioned, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, John Cena, Dave Bautista. All of these are huge mega celebrities now and are all former professional wrestlers who found success in Hollywood. Even those who don't make it to acting are often still widely known for their wrestling personas. We had Macho Man Randy Savage, Andre the Giant, who was also in some movies, Dusty Rhodes, have all seen great fame as wrestlers alone.
Right. Now, you might go, I can make a lot of money on this. And the chance to make good money in professional wrestling is there, but it's very slim. Top wrestlers today, like Roman Reigns, he's like kind of the champion right now at WWE. He makes about $5 million a year. Brock Lesnar, who's another wrestler in WWE, he makes about $12 million a year. But according to ZipRecruiter, the majority of professional wrestlers make a little more than $13 per hour on average.
That is crazy. You think about how much money they make selling tickets for a single show. And then they get paid $13 an hour. That is wildly low.
Yeah. Also, one thing that we don't talk about in this episode, but it's worth mentioning, a lot of WWE wrestlers, the people you see on TV, are contractors. They're not even employees.
Oh, that's right. And the reason they like that, or employers like that, the employees do not, is because that means that they are not obligated to receive other benefits of employment. They're not obligated to healthcare. They're not obligated to insurance. They're not obligated to retirement. They're basically seen as a gig worker functionally.
Yeah. Yep. That's going to play a role when we talk about some of the horrific dark side of the wrestling world in a little bit.
Yeah. All right. The reasons we have fame, there's money, but there's also fun.
Yeah.
That's another reason people do this. Just like any hobby, professional wrestling is simply a passion for some people. They enjoy it to a degree that they're willing to risk anything and everything, their homes, their bodies, and relationships, to pursue the dream of wrestling and what that means. That's no different than someone putting all their resources into a startup or a podcast that doesn't really make any money, but we do it anyway. Podcasts don't quite have as many head injuries. Some, not zero head injuries, but fewer.
It's never zero chance.
Right. Exactly.
So that explains a little bit about why professional wrestlers do that. But why do people like us, why do we watch it, or why do I watch it? Well, it sounds like a cop-out to say that we watch it for the stories, but that's actually what a lot of research is finding and a lot of articles are finding. Most people don't watch it for just kind of like the straight-up matches. There are some people that do. They like the athleticism and like the stunt work that's being done. But for the most part, people really like to watch it because of the storylines. Professional wrestling is not just about the matches, though they are entertaining. There are storylines that are full of twists and turns. There are underdog heroes that you want to root for. There are villains you want to see get their just desserts. There's all kinds of things that happen within the wrestling world that makes it a lot of fun to watch.
And that makes a lot of sense. Like, it's harder to imagine someone carrying through, paying that close attention to a sport where it's like you don't believe anything that's going on and there's nothing to latch onto story-wise. Like, the thing that would make it sort of carry it along is having this narrative that weaves throughout.
Right.
According to the Bleacher Report, people watch wrestling for a variety of reasons. There's the humor, the action, the drama, etc. That's all part of the fun. Like, they bring jokes, they have little like beats, they have a planned way to keep it exciting. But people also get invested in characters and stories, and they want to see them through their arcs. They want to see how it ends. They want to see how they develop and all that.
Right, because at any point in time, any wrestler can be a good guy or a bad guy. They can change sides. They can do all kinds of things. What's really nice about this is like, because you're watching this for so long and these people are on TV every single week, like you never really know what's going to happen. The storylines can kind of change week to week and you don't really know. And some of them are really good and some of them are really bad. I mean, it just depends on what you like and, the writers at the time. But some psychologists argue that watching wrestling is an example of a defense mechanism called sublimation. Basically, we watch wrestling because we are aggressive, but never act on the impulse, so we transfer it to something more useful like entertainment, supposedly. Just to reiterate, sublimation is the unconscious psychological defense that reduces anxiety that may result from unacceptable urges or harmful stimuli. So, like, basically, we just kind of transplant it onto something else and engage in an activity that doesn't mean that we actually do the thing.
How would you test to determine if someone is doing this unconsciously? You can't, but you can certainly make it up and call it a thing and then sell a book about it or something. So,
yeah, thanks, Freud.
Yeah, that's the magical explanation for why people watch it.
It made me laugh when this came up in all the psychology stuff. I will also say that sworn enemy of the podcast, Jordan Peterson's name came up in discussing why people like this, and so I decided not to use his reference because he's clearly our enemy. But it was kind of in the same boat.
It's like not being able to look away from a car crash.
A big teary-eyed car crash.
There's probably also some amount of thinking about the social fun that comes from talking with your friends about last night's match and thinking about like what's coming up and how excited, I think there is a social engagement piece of this that we don't want to ignore. But yeah, I think as you sort of said, like there's also something inherently captivating about like action sequences. We see people perform incredible stunts. We see people climb over remarkable obstacles or perform these athletic feats. I think people watch, honestly, professional sports for a similar reason a lot of the time, is it's that level of athleticism that it takes an elite performer with an enormous amount of training to be able to pull it off, and that is something that we find interesting because it's not something we do very easily. Like it's so difficult. So it's like I like watching virtuoso musicians playing their instruments extremely well because of the amount of work that went in to produce such a fluent and incredible skill set. And so anyway, that's getting off on a side tangent. Why don't you wrestle with these ads and then we'll talk about the dark side of the ring. Okay, we're back. We've been all sunshine and rainbows so far with, injury and not getting paid anything. But let's get into the actual, I think the darker, grittier, less fun side of wrestling.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth unpacking because it does sound like it's fun and it's for kids and all this stuff. I mean, some of it is. But just like any industry, there are countless stories of some problems that are pretty significant. Throughout professional wrestling, there are these harrowing tales of problems among wrestlers that are incredibly shocking, and here are a few examples. The first one that I'm going to share is from a wrestler who went by the stage name of Droz. His name was Darren Adrian Drozdov. He was known as Droz and Puke when he was in WWE. He went with Droz. Puke wasn't really going to work out. But he was a wrestler that was injured during a match. Basically, another wrestler was going to pick him up to powerbomb him, slipped and dropped him on his head by accident and broke his neck, paralyzing him from the neck down. And he was eventually able to regain movement with his arms and upper body, but was confined to a wheelchair until his passing in June of 2023. Ooh. This happened in the 90s, by the way, like late 90s, early 2000s. And WWE did a good job of keeping Droz hired and like keeping him in a job. Like he was a columnist. He was like working with the WWE. He's helping produce matches and stuff like that. But, he was injured for the rest of his life as a result of this sport.
Yeah. Bruiser Brody, while in Puerto Rico in 1988, Brody was stabbed during an altercation with another wrestler, Jose Gonzalez, who he was later acquitted with findings that he was acting in self-defense. But yeah.
So wrestler dying in a locker room.
Yeah.
Jake the Snake Roberts. So you might be familiar with that name. While many wrestlers struggled with addictions like Jeff Hardy, Ric Flair, Sting, and Scott Hall, Jake Roberts was one of the more well-known examples. He would show up to matches under the influence of a variety of substances, including opiates and alcohol. He would wrestle under the influence, which is incredibly dangerous. This one is a kind of a good news tale. Like he was able to get sober through treatment and support, and does discuss the damage that this did. I mean, he is very open and transparent about his struggles. It's unfortunate that he's had some trouble with his family members as a result of all the addictions and stuff, but he is working at AEW and he is sober, which is a really great thing to see after somebody who struggled for many, many years. You can see some wrestling matches where he is under the influence and it is really, really bad. It's scary.
Oh, that's tough. Obviously, maybe not obviously, but someone may be thinking, and I would tend to agree, what about steroids? So there's a steroid scandal in the case United States versus Vince McMahon. It was revealed that the company doctor was providing wrestlers with anabolic steroids, since the look of professional wrestlers included looking sort of larger than life. You see these like massive bodies.
Yeah.
Steroid distribution was not only condoned, it was even encouraged. And while McMahon was found not guilty, this trial did alter drug policies within the wrestling community and effectively banned anabolic steroids.
And then the last main story that we're going to talk about is Chris Benoit, and most people are probably pretty familiar with this one because it was so horrific. So just a heads up, there's a lot of violence, and if you want to skip ahead a couple minutes, you totally can. But this is one of the more widely known examples of how bad things can get. Following a welfare check to his home on June 25th of 2007, Benoit and his family were found dead. It was determined that Benoit had committed the murders and taken his own life in this horrible event. So it was a double murder-suicide. The autopsy report indicated that Benoit's brain was so severely damaged from years of professional wrestling that it resembled an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient's brain. And this advanced form of damage was similar to examples found in other people who have had repeated concussions, like chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, if you're familiar with that, like some of the stuff going on at the NFL. It's been a major topic of discussion in those high-impact sports like MMA and NFL organizations, as well as professional wrestling. It's something that's come up more often in the last few years, but they think that he was somebody who suffered from that at a pretty extreme level.
Man, that is a tough one. And this doesn't even include the numerous reports of domestic violence, Stone Cold, reckless endangerment, the plane ride from hell, sexual assault, Vince McMahon, pay scandals, sexism, racism, that has occurred within the professional wrestling world. And even I think some of the gimmicks, they had some pretty racist gimmicks that were done.
Ableist too. There's a character for a little bit who was special needs, and when the bell would ring, he would like immediately hop into wrestling mode. Like the minute he heard a bell, he would like be like a really skilled wrestler, but he was developmentally delayed.
Wow. Okay.
Terrible.
Yeah. While it has reportedly gotten better overall following countless charges and lawsuits, the world of professional wrestling still has quite a ways to go to, I think, make this a sport that's safer and less likely to result in these traumatic things to these basically actors.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to bring it back up a little bit. I think we need to do that because that was because it gets real dark. Positive lift. Yeah. So what does the research say? We like research. You like research. What does it all say? Carrick in 1980 focuses on the language of professional wrestling. So professional wrestling kind of has its own unique jargon, which is really fascinating. First, they have terms that are made up just for the industry: jobber, mark, bump, which, jobber is like somebody who just like does the job for somebody to make them look better. Mm-hmm. The mark is the person that believes it's real. The bump is the fall you take. The face is the hero. The heel is the villain. And they're all specific to practices within the profession of wrestling. So, but there is like a weird little fold to this. Much of the language is not sports and athletic oriented. It's more business focused. So terms like promoters, entertainment, top men, workers are all business oriented. And that makes it a little bit more unique than other, I guess, like sports, like specific sports like baseball, football, stuff like that. You don't really hear a lot of the same terms used the same way.
Yeah. Mondak in 1989 reviews how ethics and moral systems within professional wrestling presentations often shift and change depending on political climates. So because this is an entertainment industry like any, if you look back at movies, you'll see a similar thing. Well, movies will sort of reflect in a way the politics of the era that either were popular or aligned with a particular point or person or ideology. Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, Sergeant Slaughter, originally a good guy military soldier character, was made a villain and joined the other Iranian wrestlers in an effort to piss off fans for, again, entertainment, to get people hate buying tickets and whatnot. And this was during the 80s, 90s when the initial conflict with Saddam Hussein was occurring under H.W. Bush's turn. So this is the Bush Sr.
That was a big deal. People were real mad about that, because he was supposed to be like the stand-up good old boy type of thing, and it.
Yeah.
People were so mad. Campbell in 1996 discussed why the bad guy always wins. So in wrestling, a lot of times the bad guy will win and people get real mad about it. But essentially, they argue that the primary demographic for wrestling fans comes from urban labor workforces, which are characterized by low income, welfare recipients, or immigrants who find little success in doing things, quote unquote, the right ways, which they said. But basically, like following the system and like in the land of opportunity, this particular group tends to struggle, right? Because of all the barriers and blocks. It's because of a system, not because of them, right? The system is not set up to support them, to be clear. So fans that enjoy seeing the bad guy win, they do because it provides an alternative value system and shows them that there are multiple paths to success. Basically, that somebody can. This is directly from the article. Quote: "One can lift oneself from off the bottom of the pile by taking shortcuts and foul play in pursuit of success in life." End quote. It's a weird take. It's a weird article, but this was something that was published in a scientific journal about discussing like moral systems and alternative value systems within behavior, like human behavior.
Weird.
Yeah.
I think it is probably, I mean, first of all, because this is staged, that means that you're supposing that is the value that they're trying to tap into from the organizers and the producers of this. And I really doubt that was a discussion that very many of them have ever had, if ever.
Right.
I think that probably what it is that when the villain wins a lot, then you have hope for the next time. There is like an entertainment factor. It's not that predictable if the good guy wins every time, right?
Right.
Like you've got to have the bad guy win, or there's not that much drama. It's not that fun. It's just you see what's happening all the time. So I think you need to shake it up with having the bad guy win. That means that there's something to overcome later. I think there are plenty of other reasons that don't depend on this idea that people are following their moral shiftings of whatever that means.
Yeah, it's real. It's a real, like I said, when I was reading it, I was like, I had to include it because it was so strange.
Yeah, it's a weird take.
It's a weird take, but I think the article itself, it ignores a system in lieu of personal behavior, like individual behavior. Like it's written as if people are to blame instead of understanding how behavior happens within a system. And I thought that was a really strange thing, but I had to include it because I was like, it's just so weird. It's such a very specific take to say like this group of people like seeing the bad guy win because they can be bad guys too. It's like, no.
Yeah.
Like that's not how that works.
Yeah, I don't think we agree with Campbell here.
Nope.
Atkinson 2002 argues that much of the appeal of professional wrestling comes from a cultural perspective. On a weekly basis, at the time of this article, nearly 50 million people are watching the events regularly, despite it being fake, like it's staged, performative. The ultimate hypothesis here is that professional wrestling is doing something right, since so many folks are tuning in, but that the main cause may be culturally based. And that makes sense. I think you could probably find places of the world where they do not have sports like this, or very few people pay attention to it. And unless it is universal, we can assume that it is cultural.
Exactly. So I think there's a couple other things, though, that I think are really interesting in this realm. Because I don't know if I said this on the episode, but I said this when we were talking on the Patreon recording. So all our Patreons saw this. There is not a lot of research on the phenomenon that is professional wrestling. It's a lot of commentary.
Sure.
If there is any research, it's mostly from like a business standpoint. So it wasn't anything from a psychological standpoint that we could find, but it was just like these weird, interesting tidbits from like those different spaces. I think the most interesting thing was the jargon more than anything else.
That is really cool. I mean, It's surprising, I guess. You wouldn't have thought, but it does actually make some amount of sense when you break it down that way.
Yeah. Some last things that I think are worth sharing. The first professional world champion ever was Paul Pons the Colossus in 1898.
Ooh, that's fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Japanese wrestler Rikidozan, who is actually Korean and not Japanese, was considered one of the greatest of all time. He was stabbed by a Yakuza in a nightclub with a piss-soaked knife, later dying of his injuries.
Wild.
That's terrible.
Yeah, there's weird like mafia stuff like embedded in so much underground stuff in this world too. Snooki, which is also gross, has won more matches at pay-per-view with WWE than Sting. So Sting, the professional wrestler who has had decades of wrestling under his belt, has lost more pay-per-view matches at WWE than Snooki has.
Huh. And finally, Bruno Sammartino holds the longest title reign in professional wrestling history with a total of 2,803 days. That is a lot of days.
Yes.
He was literally champion for over 7.5 years.
Uh-huh.
But, got nothing on Ted the Black Bear.
This guy he looks like he was built of stone, this Bruno Sammartino guy. But yeah, Ted the Terrible Black Bear was, just an entirely different monster.
Yeah. All right, fun. Well, that was we actually got through that a lot faster than I thought. I was thinking this might even be a two-parter, but we just kind of blasted through it. There was so much information and so little time. So I think a couple of things, and I think what we need to do is, well, let's just get through this. First, you had mentioned people get to hear things that we say off mic, and it's a special group, an elite group, you might even say. People that are known as our patron supporters, who they help us do this by joining us on Patreon, where they get access to those behind-the-scenes content like you mentioned, and you can join them. And your list will be added to the names of such heroes as Mike M, Megan, Layla, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, and Ashley. Thank you all so much. And everyone who's listening, you can go over there if you'd like to.
Yes, please do.
In addition, you can support us by subscribing, leaving us a rating and review, picking up some merch for our merch store. I don't know, is there something else I'm missing that they can support us?
I mean, you could start a wrestling promotion, call it Why We Wrestle What We Wrestle. I mean, you can do that.
Sure. That'd be www.
I mean, I support that. I do like the idea of having, there could be a wrestler that is psychology themed. You can't call him the Brain because there's already Bobby Heenan, but you can call him something. Oh, so you can't call him the Cerebral Assassin either because there's Triple H. Never mind. Just start the promotion. That's what I would say.
there you go. Or, join us on Patreon. Thank you so much to all of you for listening. My team, Shane and myself, do writing and fact checking, audio editing and production from Justin. And our social coordinator is Emma Wilson. Was there anything else before we get to our recommendations?
I might say this. Do not call wrestling fake to a wrestler. They will take offense. It is not fake in the way that most people say. Like, it is real athleticism with pre-planned storylines. That's the best way to describe it. Don't call it fake. You will get hurt.
Yeah, well, and this, as you said, like, it's not, the athleticism isn't fake.
Not at all.
The work that they put into it isn't fake. The injuries, the danger isn't, I mean, the danger is a little bit faked in the sense that they're scripted, but I mean, the potential for danger is very real.
Yes.
And they work really, really hard at their jobs. So in a sense, it is performative. That does not make it fake. I think you phrased it very, very well in the way you said it. So with that, we do have time for one more ad break, and then we'll come back with these recommendations.
Yay!
Okay, so let's get to our recommendations.
Recommendations.
I am recommending a board game. I don't think I've recommended this, although it definitely has it's occurred to me that I might. I'm recommending a game called Boop.
You have definitely not, because I have never heard you say that like that.
Okay. So this is actually a sort of sequel to the original version of the game that's just called Boop. But the reason I recommend people go with Boop, which is a Halloween themed version, which is Boo plus Oop at the end, so Boop, so 4 O's, is that you have essentially the exact same game plus an added component if you want it. And so you can play the original version of it with this sequel game, or you can play it with the added component, and it's great. It's one of those games with like extremely simple rules and extremely high strategy. The rule is basically put one of your pieces onto the board. Where you put it will move, like the pieces that are next to it have to move away from it. That's it. And then you want to try and line up your pieces 3 in a row, which means you kind of strategically want to place them so that if you place a piece next to one of your pieces, it'll move it closer to another one of your pieces so that you can get 3 in a row. And
sure,
do it that way. And that's it. You want to get 3 pieces in a row. And putting your piece on the board moves all the pieces around it, including your opponent's. It's very simple, but the strategy is immense. Like, you can really go, deep on trying to plan for like how you're going to set yourself up for getting your 3 in a row, or block your opponent from getting 3 in a row, or both of those things. The Halloween themed version of it is great. So that's my recommendation. Is Boop.
It's adorable.
Yeah, it's all cats, by the way. And the game board is actually like a little quilted blanket. So you put these little wooden cats on the quilted blanket.
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
All right. So my recommendation is a record. I haven't recommended a record in a long time. It's from a punk band called the Penske File. So on their Spotify, it says the Penske File do it for the love of the damn thing. Friendship, rock and roll, creativity, movement, catharsis, their live shows or celebrations, so on and so forth. So they are if you're familiar with kind of like the Gainesville drunk punk sound, So stuff like Dillinger 4, stuff like Hot Water Music, in that realm, Flatliners, then you would like this band. They have really good pop sensibilities. They have really good just kind of like punk song writing. Like, it's just really great. Their new record is called Half Glow, and I have not been able to stop listening to it. It's just a really good listen if you like that kind of thing.
Fun. Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
All right, well, if you'd like to tell us about a punk record or a silly named board game, you should definitely reach out to us. But specifically, if you'd like to talk to us about something that we said about wrestling, if you'd like to add something, correct something very kindly, or give us just heaping amounts of praise, you can do that by leaving us a rating and a review somewhere. But you can also reach out to us directly. Email us at info@wwdpodcast.com or on the social media platforms, and we'll happily talk to you there. Otherwise, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for recording with me today, Shane. Also, thank you for your awesome work on the notes for today's episode.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Anything else on your end or anything I forgot before we wrap up?
Nothing on my end.
All right, perfect. Then this is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.